Moneyweb at midday for all your up-to-date stories.
The South African Post Office says it's finally moving out of business rescue and towards becoming a sustainable public enterprise. And this is obviously after years of financial distress, heavy losses and shrinking operations. But while its balance sheet has improved, cash flow remains under pressure. More government funding may still be needed, and questions also remain about whether a turnaround can survive without continued state support. Joining us now is the acting chief executive of the SA Post Office, Fatima Gane. Thank you very much indeed. Do you think the Post Office is genuinely saved, or has business rescue just bought you more time?
So I think we need to step back in terms of what is the objectives of the business rescuer, and so, they work within a defined framework of the Companies Act, and it's really to reset the business in readiness. And so when you tick the criteria against the criteria, what is the objectives of what they set out to do, those have certainly been achieved. And it's about now being positioned to take the business forward. So can it be saved? Yes, I'm here and I'm saying it can. Differently though, we keep benchmarking ourselves to the prior periods. So a very different version of a post office, but that would require still, capital injection, and whether it's from the fiscus or, SAPO raising itself on its balance sheet or through a partnership. But it's not out of the woods in terms of, a break even or even profitability. That's not what the business rescuers have achieved. They have right-sized the business. They have reset the balance sheet in readiness for the next phase of the business.
I want to talk to you about what that different version of the Post Office is going to look like. But you do have an unqualified audit, but the Auditor General is still questioning the Post Office's ability to continue as a going concern. Difficult to reconcile, surely, those 2 points of view.
Coming up through the ranks of, the auditing profession, the unqualified opinion is a very big win for us because it puts credibility for the numbers at a period in time, which is the year end. So those numbers that are now signed off on, you can place reliance on them. And what does that mean? It means you're in a state of readiness to, onboard a partner who's going to conduct a due diligence on you. So in the conduct of the due diligence, they can look at our balance sheet, they can look at our operations and say, okay, I can place reliance on these numbers. It's been signed off by the highest service assurance provider in the country. Similarly, if you take our balance sheet and we get PFMA approvals, and we go to banks and try to raise funding on the balance sheet, banks can place reliance on what we are giving them because there's now credibility. So at a point in time, that unqualified opinion makes a big difference. The going forward and looking at the going concern, that emphasis of matter is really looking to the forward and saying, okay, here we could have an issue because, again, the business is not breaking even. There will be a point where cash, which is a finite resource, is going to run out. And if our partnerships or if our revenue diversification projects don't take off at the speed that's required, then we would be looking to the fiscus and saying we need some working capital to keep us at abeyance while this materializes.
And that's a difficult one to justify to taxpayers who might want to say, why should we put more money into the Post Office after business rescue?
Why you should is because the social mandate has never gone away. So the reason why we exist today is because, it was worth putting the business into rescue and not liquidating it at the time of provisional liquidation, is because there is a social mandate that the Post Office still holds and needs to execute on. Now, the relevance of the social mandate is declining because mail in its traditional form is a declining mail business. But it's still relevant for our South Africa and its people because not everybody has connectivity to emails and to be able to receive electronic communication. And so there's a huge dependency, particularly in the areas that are not urbanized, for the mailman. And our business model is really twofold. It's the mailman and then it's what we call last mile, and then it's our branches. And a lot of times we are benchmarked on the branches. And so the last mile and the mail business is, it's forgotten.
I want to talk to you a little bit about that different version. If I've read the data correctly, well over 4,000 jobs have gone, branches have been cut. Fatima, how much smaller must the post office become before the numbers actually start to work? In other words, what is that different version going to look like down the line?
The version of Fatima is that it can't be cut any further, then it's not relevant. In order to meet that social mandate, the number that we have today, which is, after the Section 189 job losses and after the branch rationalization, that is the tipping point of I need to be in existence for this. And now it's about how do you build on it and diversify, because you're going to need commercial activities to supplement the social mandate, which is why you are relevant and why you exist. So it's complex and not a perfect science, but you can only build from the number of employees that you have, and you can only build from the number of branches that you have. Reducing it makes, it's pointless reducing it, because at where we're sitting today is we have a national address database and we have a reach, and that is the reason why we deliver on the social mandate. And that's not gone away.
What would you say to private courier companies, Fatima, that argue the post office is being kept alive by the state while they have to compete without that safety net?
Because the private courier companies, and we've seen this, we went to market for private-public partnerships, in December. And what we've seen, and including over and above that, we've had unsolicited companies coming to us, which we are busy with. It's a work stream for us on how we onboard. Is that the private players are good in the urban areas, and where the post office has value for them is in the rural areas, because we have the footprint and the reach. And so it could complement and be a very good marriage between the state as well as these private entities in terms of delivering a holistic courier services to South Africans, because their value proposition is more dense in your cities, and we have the ability in rural areas. And, that should be the value proposition and the win-win between both entities.
And to that point, you have received, as I understand it, strong interest from potential partners, but you'll agree with me that interest is not revenue. At this point, as we have this conversation, how much of the turnaround is still only a plan?
A significant amount of the turnaround is a plan, because we are coming out of business rescue. And so it's about how do you get the plan in motion. And while we have work streams and there are some activities which have taken off the ground, they're not the activities that's going to move the needle. So, bringing on RTO with motor vehicle licensing, or bringing on the new lotteries operator with the, those are good, initiatives. However, what's going to move the needle is onboarding a significant partner that complements or supplements our business. Now, they would have their process and we have our process. And you said you're absolutely correct in saying, yes, we've gone to market. We've had surprisingly very good traction. We now have a framework with a transaction advisor on how to onboard the partners. And so the next point is, after a request for information, we're now going to draft requests for proposals and make it tangible. We're still a state-owned entity, so we have to comply with Public Finance Management Act. And so, these are the things that probably take longer, but you're doing it in the manner that you should be doing it. And so, yes, it's taking longer. And while we're speaking, the post office is still in motion. And so you're still burning working capital, which brings me to, yes, that's where we are in terms of the auditor being concerned that, going concern is an emphasis, something they would like to emphasize on.
Just a final question. Assets now exceed liabilities. That's a good thing. But cash, as you've outlined to me, does remain under pressure. How close are you to another liquidity crisis?
We have applied to government on our MTF funding. I know it's being deliberated on because I worked on it, further supplementary information. So we're very dependent on that. Or we'd be having a different conversation if that didn't materialize.
I'm going to leave it there. Acting Chief Executive Officer of the South African Post Office, Fatima Gane, thank you indeed.